What is up, everyone? Welcome to BRAP. Let me turn my mic down here a little bit. Give me a sec here, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I should say. So I wanted to do a impromptu BRAP rant this evening. We're gonna have Game Logic here joining us in just a sec to discuss kind of what's the big news of the week, kind of what's happened here. Recently with the acquisition of Activision by Activision Blizzard, I should say, by by Microsoft. By the way, if you're new to the show, hit that like button. Well, actually, everyone, big shout out to everyone in the live chat first of all, and then obviously hit that like button. And if you're new, subscribe, hit that bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. So please, everyone. Really appreciate the support as always. I mean, I think, over the last, I don't know, we've been doing this for how many years now? I think we've been doing BRAP since like 2015-ish. I think that's right. I don't remember. Anyhow, we've been doing it for quite some time. So drop a link here in the live chat, please. Retweet, and definitely appreciate the likes, everyone, as well. So I'm going to talk about we're going to talk a little bit about some new details that have come up as regarding the Call of Duty exclusivity. I can't even say that word for some reason. The Call of Duty exclusivity. I'm still not saying that right. Exclusivity. I can't get it. Anyhow, clearly BRAP kid it doesn't speak English well, so it is what it is. So I'm sure somebody in the live chat will probably correct me there, but anyhow. And also want to discuss a narrative that I've been seeing going around more recently is the I don't know how to say it. The kind of the takes that I've been seeing as a result of the acquisition. Like, one of the things that's kind of interesting is you get these takes with on the Twitters, if you will. And we got Game Logic in the house. What's up, Game Logic? If you can hear me, if you're there. Hello. Maybe he's still setting up.
Hey, BRAP, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. I don't see you in Discord for some reason. Hold on. What is going on here? Oh, I see you now. Hold on just a sec here. Let me All right, we have Game Logic in the house. Game Logic, man. Happy Saturday to you, sir. How's your weekend going?
It's going good. Glad to be hanging out on a Saturday night.
Yeah, man. No, thank you. I appreciate you hopping on board. It was kind of like last minute, so certainly appreciate it as always, man. But yeah, so Game Logic, I know you got off Twitter, and I can understand why. So I'm gonna talk about a few things that I'm seeing. Because I think it's hard to sometimes provide a different perspective with the fact, because we have you're limited to the character the character count on Twitter. You can't type everything per se that you may want to say, right? Like just can't do it, and sometimes things get lost in translation. I often wonder if people are actually reading what you're typing, or they're just so ready to answer what you want to. They're so anxious to just reply what their next reply is going to be, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I've seen this narrative out there, and it's basically, and I've seen, and Destin Legary in particular, actually, I was kind of surprised. He's a journalist for IGN. If you guys, I don't know Game Logic, if you read any of his work or follow him. But he actually put out this interesting tweet. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Give me a sec here. By the way, Game Logic, I definitely need dual monitors, by the way, when I podcast. All right, let's see here. Pull this up real quick. Give me a second. Hope everyone can see this. All right, here we go. All right, so just pull this up. This tweet, Destin Legary says, so let me get this straight. Sony makes Final Fantasy, Street Fighter, Spider-Man, and Wolverine PlayStation exclusive. Xbox makes Elder Scrolls, Starfield, and possibly some Activision games Xbox exclusive. Xbox equals bad. Sony equals good. Just want to be sure I have my facts right. I got to be honest with you. I'm kind of surprised Destin's even entertaining this conversation because I have seen it quite a bit in the Twitters. And I just wanted to just address something quickly regarding that particular topic, because I think the unfortunate thing is that, we've seen, I don't think anyone's surprised. We've kind of seen the console wars kind of back and forth. And with this acquisition, and there's something that came up. Like, I think there's a little more context to than what Destin realizes here. And again, I'm a little surprised that he's kind of dipping his toes in the waters here, because he's a journalist at IGN, but I understand journalists have opinions, and I think there's a little more context here that probably should be highlighted in the sense that I think the conversation originally started regarding around whether or not Microsoft acquiring these billion-dollar publishers is a good idea for the industry. It's a fair conversation to have. It immediately turned to this thing where it was, well, why is that bad, or why are we having this conversation when Sony has basically money-hatted third-party exclusives? They have their own exclusive content. Final Fantasy VII Remake, where is that on Xbox? Did Sony take that away? Et cetera, et cetera. I look, that's not a uncommon practice in industry. I understand that the end result is probably the same, but there's probably a little more context here that's not being discussed. That it's not just a issue of exclusive content just being removed from one platform. There is a difference, and this is and I've went down the rabbit hole with individuals about this who were like, oh, Sony does the same thing. I'm like, well, look, the end game is the same in terms of just keeping content off platforms, but there's something to be said when you buy billion-dollar publishers who have 10,000 employees, and people were, throwing up the Final Fantasy VII Remake as an example and Street Fighter V, and I would respond to that my response was, hey, well, Capcom can still actually release games on Xbox, and Square Enix can still release games on Xbox. Bethesda, outside of just Elder Scrolls Online, will never see those games ever again on PlayStation. And Activision, we may not see any of those games on PlayStation as well. Then that's not the case with Square Enix or Capcom. And again, the other thing is billion dollar, acquiring billion-dollar publishers who have 10,000 employees. What are the ramifications for that long term within the industry? So just something I wanted to kind of discuss, because I was kind of surprised by Destin kind of addressing this, because I don't necessarily totally agree with what he's saying here. I don't think it's a matter of bad or good. It's a matter of that in some ways the acquisition of these large publishers is a little bit different than what Sony's doing. So, Game Logic, do you have any thoughts on that, man? What I just discussed, or kind of what's that conversation, what's been going around? I know you're not on Twitter, but that's kind of been something, a discussion piece that's been going around.
Yeah, well, there are a few pieces of that to pull apart. I mean, my first thing is I don't know that he's wrong. I mean, he's definitely agitating. I mean,
yes.
And he's wrong in this specific situation or scenario. But just to walk it back to the generality, of at least the impression that I take away when the exclusives go down is I feel like what I see from um, from PlayStation fans is a general rumbling of, when it's Spider-Man or any of these other things, I see a lot of rah-rah and a lot of cheerleading,
Sure.
and a lot of kind of poking fun about like,
Yes, absolutely.
Xbox are never going to get their hands on this and yada yada yada, and happiness and rejoicing. But the moment Microsoft makes a similar move to lock something down, by paying money, and let's be clear, both companies, when it comes to third party, um, or any other IP that they don't own, they are exchanging money in return for the exclusivity on that. But I feel like when Microsoft does it, it becomes Phil Spencer lied, and he doesn't really think about gamers, and this is the death of whatever. So I feel like what I see is not level headed and fair handed. Now, that being said, that's just typically the case that you're always in the lead console of any generation is always going to come through it with a sense of unevenness, just because those opinions are in the majority, right? Um, so so again, I think in certain contexts he's not wrong. Comparing the Microsoft acquisition to games going exclusive is incorrect. But again, I think the generality of it feels like, there's a rumbling that, whenever Sony does something, then it's okay, but if Microsoft does something, then it's unethical or immoral or somebody lied or whatever. That all being said, what was the last thing that we saw about Sony, the continuing of the manufacturing of the PlayStation 4s? That was bad because Jim Ryan lied about the generation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. You definitely get it both sides, yeah.
Right. Yeah, a lot of these takes are kind of way over.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, to me, this matter of the acquisition and the takes and the reactions are coming down to what is probably the case with any of the topics that we bring up when we come on, is fear. Fear of the ramifications, sometimes driven by people wildly, prognosticating things that are, incredible extrapolations of any type of ground truth that are not founded in any, financial reality or any understanding of the market and things like that. So I don't know, but Destin definitely stoked the fire again. I've seen people lob things in his direction as well. So
yeah, no, he definitely was dipping his toes. And my point was like the end game, like in terms of exclusivities, I can't even say that word, by the way. That's true. Yeah, Sony's doing it, Microsoft's doing it, but what I'm seeing is people trying to compare buying, $70 billion on a publisher and then throwing up Final Fantasy VII. I'm like, that's not really the same thing. Or,
sure, yeah.
Or that's yeah, and so we can acknowledge that both do both do the same. And you're absolutely right. Like, you see it on both sides. Like, one it's evil when one does it, it's evil when the other does it. But what I was shocked is that people are actually running with that. Well, it's the same thing as buying a $70 billion. Well, no, it's not. I think it's a little more nuanced than just, well, you're getting exclusive content. It's just, right? You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I know I'm kind of rambling on here, but I didn't get much sleep last night. I got back to the hotel last night. As I told you, I went to go see. If everyone follows me on Twitter, I posted pictures. I went to go see AEW in Washington D.C. And that was actually kind of cool. It was the first time I've done anything in 2 years, really, because of COVID. My son's took my son. He's double vaxxed, and I'm double vaxxed and boosted. And in DC, which I was surprised, Game Logic, they were like requiring you bring your vaccine cards, which is kind of was interesting experience for me, because I'm like, I've only ever read about those kinds of things and never actually experienced what that's like. So, but they were there, they were checking. So, but anyhow. I digress. So yeah, so I didn't get to bed till like really late, so I know I'm rumbling here, but does that make? I guess is that kind of? I guess that was kind of my overall point, that that it's not the same per se, because 70 billion, and I think the ramifications of that too. And I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be bad long term, but imagine that there's probably a bigger ripple effect in the industry when you do that than maybe money having a third party exclusive, or something like to that effect, right?
Well, it's an interesting discussion of scale, and I think it's a matter of chicken and egg, right? I mean, if you could say from a certain perspective that if you look back over the last 5 or 6 years and looked at the excuse me, the number of exclusives that went to the Sony platform in comparison to Microsoft's state of exclusives, which admittedly was somewhat driven by their own either lack of going after them or not making it a priority or whatever you want to call it, right? You could definitely say that you would feel that there could be a perspective that overall in the industry there was a slant towards supporting the PlayStation platform, and I don't even think metrically that would be entirely untrue. It would be a matter of you would have to take that in quantifiable context. I think this move of acquisition by Microsoft, like you mentioned, is going to have significant ramifications. I feel like a lot of people are trying to ascribe ethics and morality and I don't know whether it's Elliot Ness or Al Capone to the motivations behind these moves, and I'm like, guys, I don't think we need to take it that far. I think
no, we don't. We definitely don't. No.
The business and the financial analysis and make some assessments off of that, for our own purposes, rather than again trying to war or decide it's okay for Sony to mob up and collect everyone's trash, but it's bad when Microsoft does it. I think the key things that you and I have been kicking around this week is that in comparison, best as we can tell, right, the total value of the PlayStation division is probably around 40 to 45 billion dollars. That means Microsoft is essentially buying 1.5 PlayStation divisions, right? And that's a significant flex, right?
It's a big flex, yeah.
And it's kind of funny and hilarious how these things, both with this one and Bethesda, these things drop at like the wee hours of the morning on a Monday, when at least on the East Coast, we're commuting into work, right? A lot of these things, these things have come while I'm in the car, stuck in traffic, and then like my phone just starts blowing up, and it just seems kind of funny. It feels like it's Satya and Phil just kind of rolled out of bed, we're sipping coffee and we're like, yeah, what if we just bought Activision, right? So of course, obviously, it didn't go down, and it's way more complex than that. But another thing that I was looking at, you and I had been talking about revenue across the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, I'm not sure if I have all my numbers right around, but I want to say the total revenue last year of the gaming industry was, I want to say it was like 130 billion or something like that. And so maybe more, but what I did see is that Activision's was about 8 billion, Microsoft's was about 15, and when you combine those two revenue numbers in a year, you wind up with a revenue total that just ekes out Tencent, who I think was somewhere between like 19 and 22 billion. So. On one hand, and we talked a little bit about Tencent, and we can talk about that a little bit more. You had a significant market force whose appetite for acquisition, I would contend, was showing no signs of waning.
Absolutely not.
Like they would have eventually gotten around to mounting up something that would look similar to a takeover of a buyout of a major publisher. Along the lines of acquisition.
And by the way, Tencent's market cap is 555 million, if I'm not mistaken. Or I'm sorry, billion with a B.
Right.
555 billion.
And that's everything. Now they do more than just gaming. So that's all of their divisions. But but the big bulk of that, a lot of that comes from gaming. Whereas Microsoft's gaming division is kind of like a pebble in the pond, right, in comparison to everything else that they do. Um, so had Microsoft not made a move, I guess I would contend that you would have just seen a gradually increasing block of revenue oriented around Tencent, and then what was the industry going to do about that?
Yeah, and that's, I think, Phil kind of in a more recent press release or interview said, this move was to kind of protect the industry more or less, like from the Apples, the Googles, the Tencents, right? Because he doesn't believe Sony and Nintendo would do damage to the industry, right? And so I'm not sure how much I buy that, but other than really, look, this was an opportunity for Microsoft to acquire a publisher and really bulk up Game Pass. I mean, that's what this is. It's what all these acquisitions point to, building out Game Pass. But so let me get to Super Chat real quick. Jonas Lefevre says, with the $2 Super Chat, thank you for that. Says, if Sony did this, all would be PlayStation only forever. I think he's referring to the conversation around Call of Duty exclusivity, and if that's and what that means for PlayStation potentially. But the other thing too that I was seeing Game Logic out of this acquisition was, but somehow so clearly there's something happening in the industry, right? I mean, Microsoft is carving out a new business model, and the first to do so, kind of that Netflix model, right? And people have been discussing, does Sony need to do anything? How do they respond to this? And look, Sony cannot win an arms race with Microsoft. They just can't. I think we all know that, right?
I think it would be foolish to try. It would very much look like the Cold War.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was just gonna say, we don't want to see this Cold War in gaming. No, I don't think we benefit from that per se. But Sony, Sony could still. It's interesting. I was one of those guys, Game Logic, that used to say, I was an Xbox fanboy. I've admitted this many podcasts ago. I used to be a forum moderator on the GameSpot forums, believe it or not, for the Xbox forums within GameSpot. So anyhow, that was interesting times. I used to wave the green flag. I used to do that, so I understand the mentality, I guess. But I could tell you some stories, Game Logic. You'd be like, why did you do that?
Yeah, it's a hard life. That's like being a Cleveland Browns or a Cincinnati Bengals fan.
Oh, yeah. We're not saying Xbox is the equivalent to the Browns or because someone will think that's kind of a shot. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
Or being like a Washington football fan. Oh boy, that is. So I lost my train of thought. I'm really tired. I didn't go to bed till late last night. So, they don't have to. So I had this conversation with somebody earlier today. I think you saw some of what I was sharing with you, right?
Yeah. By the guy who predicted for us Game Pass and several other prophecies that have been realized in the gaming industry. Yeah.
Exactly, the prophecies, which I find funny. It's like, dude, a broken clock's right. Anyhow, twice a day, but. Is it twice a day? Once I always butcher that analogy, by the way. That
yeah, in the analog days, twice a day. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, twice a day. Yes. So, what's interesting about that? Okay, so what you said, you got coffee. I was like, I should have got some coffee while I had the chance to. But what's interesting is that I'm seeing these hot takes. And the reason why I'm talking about this, Game Logic, because I want to offer a different perspective. I'm trying to offer I don't know, just a different perspective than some of these takes that I'm seeing, the hot takes, if you will, right?
Hot takes on Twitter and pie faces on YouTube, man.
Exactly. And so this idea that from this, and I'm not going to mention this person's name. I don't want them to think that I'm picking on them, because I do enjoy having conversations with this individual. I just think sometimes, yeah, people are making takes about things they probably don't understand, which is an issue with social media, obviously. I mean, we see that every day if you're on social media. And I agree. Like this individual said, PlayStation can't compete nor answer back. No, they can't compete in an arms race. Like they're not going to. They can't answer back by acquiring something as impactful as Activision Blizzard. Like that's never going to happen, right? Sure, could they could acquire some additional studios, which they've been doing. Maybe they buy Square Enix. It's kind of something that's been discussed. I don't know if that happens. But they'll probably do what they've been successful doing, and that's muddy hatting third-party deals, building relationships with studios, acquiring studios. And I don't think Sony. This individual said that Microsoft's blazing the trails, and Sony's kind of like a dinosaur, and I get that. Like Sony's not trying to create a new business model in the gaming industry. They're not doing that. That's not. They're not trying to do that. They're trying to sell consoles because it's profitable for them to do so. They have a valuable brand in the PlayStation brand, right? I mean, they're in terms of next generation hardware, they're selling PlayStation 5s like hotcakes. They're doing well. I mean, they're still doing very well. I mean, look at the release window for PlayStation 5 or just the PlayStation platform in general, starting next month. Horizon Forbidden West is coming out. They also have GT7 coming out, I think, in March, if I'm not mistaken. God of War is supposed to be releasing this year as well. So,
yeah,
and
Forspoken.
Forspoken, yeah. So
it's a pretty packed billing,
Yeah.
For them for AAA content of the type that Sony does.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and they have what's that game? Sifu, which has caught the attention of some people that I speak to that they're excited about. That. I don't know if have you seen that game much? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very very stylistic and actually has the name of I was a fan of the Marco Polo show on Netflix, and of course the great mentor on there. His name I think that character's name was Sifu. So it has some I don't want to say it's not nostalgia because Marco Polo was only a few years ago, but it's got some emotional hooks, and I've definitely been interested in it.
Yeah, and there's some buzz around that game. It's a smaller game, and Sony does a pretty good job, I think, at giving you the big AAA Hollywood bangers, and then sprinkling some other games that are smaller in nature. Kena Bridge of Spirits is something that comes to mind, which is actually a pretty good game. I really enjoyed it. I haven't beaten it, but really enjoying that game. But so Sony's obviously kind of in that. In the old model, if you will. I think the model's changing. We'll talk about that a little bit, Game Logic, about what the industry might look like a couple years down the road, maybe 10 years down the road. But yeah, they're not doing that. But my argument was that, I do think that the pie's big enough, and Sony's not. The one thing that I've learned, and I was talking about Nintendo earlier. Like I'd predicted the death of Nintendo like 20 years ago, Game Logic, right? I said, because they're not incorporating an Ethernet port in the GameCube, and because they're not using DVD disc, or they don't have an Ethernet port, they don't have Xbox Live, they're just going to fall to the wayside of Sony and Xbox. This is it. They're done, right? And then they dropped the Wii, and we know how the Wii 2 was kind of right? But then they come back with the Switch. And look what Nintendo's done with the Switch. And I guess for me, I think the one constant that I take away, and I've been gaming for, oh my God, a very long time, since I was 5 years old. So 40 years now. I just hit 40 years of gaming. I started gaming when I was 5 years old. And it's funny because somebody brought back, oh, they should bring Pitfall, and I was like, oh my god, I remember playing Pitfall when I was a kid on the Atari 2600. That was and back then that game was like amazing. You look back at it now, I'm like, okay. But and this is just playing video games over the last 40 years and just my prediction that I totally missed with Nintendo, the demise of Nintendo, because they weren't doing these industry cutting things and they were kind of a dinosaur. I think the one constant I would say is that content is king. Content matters, right? And I do think that if the industry does go to a subscription model, right? And I think the end game here is obviously xCloud Game Pass, right? That's the end game for Microsoft, I think. And to reach, it's not really about consoles, I don't think, for them anymore. I think it's really about reaching those other markets where PC mobile's dominant, and getting their footholds in there with Game Pass xCloud. But my point was, and this goes back to some of these takes that I'm seeing as a result of this acquisition, that I do think the pie is going to be big enough, and I mean the pie being like the gaming industry is so big now, right? It's so profitable now, and if you've been following it, I mean, obviously, like we've been gaming a long time, Game Logic, like companies are taking notice now, right? I don't have the numbers, but it's like bigger than like movies or music now. I don't know. I'm not sure about music, but I'm pretty sure movies now. Is that? I don't know if that.
I didn't look at how it compares, but yeah, like I said, the last few years have been the biggest ever for the gaming industry, and I believe that revenue number was up around 130 billion.
Yeah, so it's huge, and so of course these companies are like, "Oh, wait a minute, what's this over here? How do we get into that?" Right? And so I do think that the pie will be big enough for them to pivot. I don't buy this idea. This gentleman said, again, I'm not trying to pick on this individual, just trying to address some, I think, maybe misconceptions, I guess, about maybe where the industry is going, and that, in fact, that only companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, Tencent, Microsoft, that the pie's only be big for those who can afford to drop billions. I don't agree with that, because Sony can still be successful in whatever lane they choose to be in, because I think there may be multiple lanes. And even I think if this thing goes full-on cloud subscription, who's to say that they can't survive in that model either, considering the content they have, They've already done streaming. They've had PlayStation Now on PlayStation TVs. So they've had that app there, where you could access content. Who's to say they can't do that? I think they can. And there's probably opportunities for them in terms of the infrastructure piece. They could probably partner. Maybe they do have that Azure deal with Microsoft. Maybe that's who they partner with for that. But there's certainly opportunities. I'm not buying that only Apple and Google can compete in this new paradigm or whatever it is, right? What are your thoughts on that, Game Logic? With regards to, the subscription piece, could Sony compete in that new space? Is this kind of where we're going?
Yeah, and just first one correction. Somebody in the chat, T Rock, got it at the same time that I pulled up. So actually, game revenue back in we're only in January. Game revenue last year was upwards of probably a skosh over 180 billion.
Wow.
So some of the things you were asking and talking about, I think any of those things are a ways off, but I also think the competitive slices, some of those become verticals and are not, and adjacencies, and are not the head-to-head competition that I think a lot of people get themselves contorted about, when discussing the whole Microsoft versus Sony thing. The Microsoft, and I completely agree that at a employee level, at a team level, I'm certain that development teams within Microsoft game studios say, hey, look at those Sony guys, right, and compare themselves and think about, oh, well, our game needs to be this much better than like the Sony thing, and I get that, but at the top end of the scale, those aren't the conversations. Um, and we've talked before, what keeps Microsoft awake at night is what Google and Amazon are doing. Um, Now, where this play in the gaming division comes, and in the $70 billion, $68.7 billion, or whatever for Activision, I mean, quite honestly, I'm not absolutely certain where they're skating to. What we do know is that in one of their earnings calls, I think last year, maybe in 2020, what Nadella talked about was that the total number of gamers on the planet and the people that they're trying to reach. And I can't remember the total number of gamers that he said, but I know that
3
he said
billion.
3 billion.
I think it was 3 billion. Yeah, 3 billion. I think Phil mentioned that as well.
Okay, and
Yeah.
and what they commented on is that their strategy is around reaching those 2 billion gamers who don't have the financial being, are not across the financial and digital divide where they can afford to buy a $500 console to get into the gaming space. And so it seems, right, that kind of like you're thinking that buying Activision, which has a huge and so Activision, EA, and Take Two now, after the recent acquisition of Zynga, are all third-party publishers that and Take Two has been actually struggling with regards to revenue. That has not been up at where Activision and EA have been plowing like somewhere between 19 and 22 billion dollars of revenue, I think, over the last few years. Maybe more like 14 billion. And a large part of that comes from their mobile divisions. And Take Two had been down at like 3 billion, and so the acquisition of Zynga makes sense for them if kind of the new model of the big third party publisher that we're thinking about is a strong stable of studios pumping out console and PC content coupled with a mobile division that has all the gotcha mechanics,
Yep.
and can get that type of support. So and it's not my idea. Actually, I was in a Spaces right before I left Twitter, and a young lady brought up the one of her concerns and problems with the Game Pass strategy was that, and I did talk a few weeks ago about kind of the history of controller design, and how when you look at controller design, which you extract out of that is a inherent design factor that is oriented around complexity and gradually increasing complexity if you look at the course of the console generations over time. Right, every next console generation always brought with it kind of more buttons and then implemented, analog controls, not simply digital controls, and then scuff and the elite controller and all types of shift buttons and yada yada yada. In countries where there is a large mobile gaming uptake, they don't have that complexity of control schemes. Everything is kind of simplified. And I talked about, hey, well, look at what Microsoft did with implementing, the virtual controls, kind of embedded in the touchscreen, but mapped in, with the same vectors that that an Xbox controller would. And that's good. That's a good step, but it's still not. It still doesn't distill it down to that same level of simplicity. And there are games that have touch controls enabled, right? That just take the original controller design and orient it more towards just a straight up touch interface, not a virtualized controller. And so I think, and I think you mentioned it too, right, that a large part of this acquisition has to do with taking Game Pass and not just pulling some people across the fence, right, by putting something like a Call of Duty in Game Pass, because as you and I talked about, you can put Call of Duty in Game Pass and not make it exclusive, right? And then you kind of create this, trolley problem, right, for a gamer to decide, hey, do I pay, 10 or $15 a month, and get Call of Duty out of it, or do I pay, $70 up front, right, for Call of Duty? And that for some people will be a choice. But I think a lot of it is about packing into Game Pass a ton of mobile games, that will be highly appealing to people in the Eastern world and in South America and in some of these countries that don't have as huge of a console following. Um, what will be interesting from my perspective to see is, and I think they have to do it because I think it's the only way to do it. It will be really interesting to see if they do that in the Apple Arcade way, in that Apple Arcade puts all those games in there and strips them or does not permit microtransactions within them. And that would be a huge game changer in at least the mobile gaming space. If you could, I mean, because so many times with mobile games, I say, look, I just don't want you to bother me. Look, I will pay you $15 for the game to remove all the ads and for you to not pop an alert every time I finish a level telling me that, if I just, bought the season pass, battle pass, 15, like,
Yeah.
Gajinnia coins or whatever, right? Like, I just want to play the game and I want to not be bothered while I'm doing it. I will pay you the money up front. And so many times with mobile games, I just do that, like, right off the bat. Like, it's not required, but, I just go ahead and do it. That would be a significant changer in the mobile space. That would make them compete differently with EA's mobile gaming division and Zynga, right, in terms of, tilting that monetization model on its head.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Game Logic. And, I think because we're here in the U.S., North America, and we're so, and most of us are on the console side of things here that we don't, I think, understand the big picture. And like I said, and I think like you said, like, this is about reaching other people that can't, afford the $500 box, or maybe just have the interest in it anyway, right? Like, hey, you know what? I'm here on mobile, or I game on PC, and like I said, I mean, there's parts of the world globally where Microsoft doesn't have, any inroads, where Nintendo and Sony do, where again, mobile and PC are the primary platforms, and so this. One of the things I've seen, people are so hyper focused on Xbox, the console, and this acquisition. This is bigger than Xbox, the console, in my opinion. This is Microsoft saying, "Hey, we feel like there's something here. There's a once in a lifetime opportunity." And it kind of makes me think of them missing the boat in the mobile space when Steve Ballmer laughed at the Apple iPhone and said, "It doesn't even have what do you say? It doesn't even have a keyboard." You remember that?
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the strongest indicators of that is, it was a strong indicator when they renamed it last time, right? But Phil Spencer's new title is CEO Microsoft Gaming. And I know it's a swim back, right? But that's kind of what they used to be called before. They were labeled something that was Microsoft, right? Then they became the Xbox Games division, and that was like when they were a teenager, Now they're an adult, right? And they're now Microsoft Gaming again, which clearly indicates that it's a play that is out beyond Xbox.
Exactly.
And for a while, the Xbox relabeling made sense because what they talked about was, hey, our whole gaming ecosystem is the Xbox brand. But again, they've gone back to Microsoft Gaming, and I can't help but wonder, is that because, hey, in countries like Japan, right, they don't care about Xbox. Right? And if I'm going to make a play in mobile, do I go with a Microsoft brand versus an Xbox brand? And I don't know that for certain. It's just a speculation. But same thing, right, with India, right, and other countries, right? Is it better for us to get our toes out there, under that Microsoft thing rather than an Xbox thing, which might have, again, carry with it that connotation of Xbox being associated with the $500 box. So, it'll just be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, no, it is. So Game Logic, do you think this is like the next paradigm shift then? Do you think that at some point, I know you said we're kind of a ways off, but like, and nothing's 100%, right? But could you see this, could you see a time where we ditch consoles and it's basically like what we're seeing, like what's happening right now with subscription models on television and movies, where it's just like Netflix, it's an app on your phone, an app on your TV. If it's an app on your TV, then you have your controller, everything's cloud, and it's all subscription based. Do you think that's kind of where this thing's going?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to give you a bunch of mealy mouth answers, right? That don't really land on that. So I'm trying to figure out which parts of myself I'm channeling as I answer each of these. So the hardware part. Um, I still continue to think and hold on to the notion. So I think I mentioned last week. I'm not certain. So I think very very far in the future, the whole planet will go to consolidated computing.
You mentioned that, yeah, yep.
Yeah, because again, it doesn't make sense that within, let's say, a 10 block radius, right, I have 25 computers that utilize 10% of their compute capacity, right? And then I got 90% of 25 computers left over that nobody's using and nothing's being applied for any good reason. That just doesn't make sense. And I think energy and the environment and all sorts of other things will cordon us towards this notion of, you know, some type of supercomputer ish kind of thing, servicing a bunch of people, and you um, subscribing or checking it, whatever. You're going to be allocated a certain amount of compute time, um, and that should meet everyone's needs pretty sufficiently. But I think before then, I still hold on to the notion that, and look, I subscribe to Stadia. I've tried Xbox Cloud Gaming. I've tried GeForce Now. I'm good. I like cloud gaming because it fits a certain gaming modality for me, right? Specifically when I go on travel, it unbuckles me from the absolute necessity to have to lug a 10-pound gaming laptop, right? Or in some cases, even carry my Nintendo Switch, right? And when I'm traveling with my family, it's just less stuff that I have to take because I'm going to take a tablet anyway. So if I just take a tablet, throw my Stadia controller in the bag, right, then I can play on my tablet or on my phone, and I don't have to bring other stuff. Um, so I like cloud gaming. However, that's a tough argument to make to do that when I'm at home, right? And when I'm home, I have all my stuff, and I'm like, why would I ever accommodate even a second, 2 seconds of latency, right, and distancing, right, from that direct control input, right, when I don't have to. And so I think, before we get to that point, there's going to be a contingent that always holds on to that. And I think one of the conversations I'm going to have tomorrow is a friend of mine from Twitter who ascribes to this notion that like the Steam Deck and things are going to be kind of the new thing. And I'm like, but so many of us in gaming are not oriented around the good enough, right? Yes, I get that there's stuff that's good enough. I've spent a career right online blogging about and reviewing this low compute approach to various hobbies, right? And messing with ultra mobile PCs and netbooks and tablets and kind of having a grin on my face whenever I can kind of flex them to do things that are close to what a console could do or what a desktop PC could do. But those are always like experiments, and there's always going to be a point where those things topple over. And so, you know, most of my, I don't want to say buying habits, but a lot of things that I go after are not about getting the good. I don't go buy a CPU that's just going to get me by for now, or a GPU that's just going to get. I buy to. I hate to use the term future proof, but I buy to make sure that that thing has some longevity and that I have overhead, right? Because I don't want, again, I don't want to bring a 45 to the fight if the 45 gets the job done, right? I want to bring a 50 cal to the fight because I want to have an edge, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're a ways. I think that still is going to formulate a part of the market, and typically that formulates the part of the market that spends more money, right, per person per capita. So I think we're a ways off from there. I think then the other part of me that does agree with you, right, that we're pointing in that direction, but I think that also addresses slightly different market segments. And so the people who are warring on Twitter are warring as if that is a matter of building out services that compete for the same customers, and it's not, right? Not inherently. There's some overlap.
Yeah.
But those are new customers, right? First of all, those are new gamers coming into the force. And yes, generationally, eventually you're going to get to a generation of gamers that's okay with that latency and who doesn't mind it, because we all acclimate to what we grow up
I
with.
mean,
Right?
I honestly think that could be my kids' game logic. Like, and I use them as an example real quick. Didn't mean to interrupt, but just using them as an example. Like my first time gaming was in front of a TV, holding a joystick, right, putting a cartridge in. Their first gaming experience was picking up a tablet and streaming whatever it was that they could play on that tablet.
Right. Right. Now, my kids do the same. However, not due to any influence of mine, as far as I know. My kids understand that is not the complete gaming experience.
No,
right?
mine are aware of that too. That has to do with my influence. So.
So they understand that they've got training wheels on while they're doing that, right? Until they kind of grow up and graduate, right, to gaming of a higher fidelity. But my feeling is that, right, those things are going to stand up, and they're going to become new kind of market segments and new verticals, and there are going to be new customers in those. And you may have customers that flit across, right, multiple sets of those verticals. We talk a lot about, and I feel like the jury's still out, and I don't feel like these analogies are bad. I just don't think that they're conclusive. We talk a lot about comparing the gaming industry to what we see in the television and cable industry. And I would even say sometimes, people should look at the music industry as well. But we talk about like the Netflixes and the Disney Pluses and, the HBO Maxes and stuff. And, one thing we've seen from that industry is cable hasn't died. Xfinity hasn't gone away. DirecTV is still around, right? These are additional services, and we have some people who are cord cutters who have gone hard left, right?
So
and said no more cable.
I'm
right?
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. This goes back to my whole point about the pie that I made the pie reference I made earlier, right? But go ahead, man.
Yeah, and and you have and then you have some customers who have stayed with cable. Like, it took me a while to win the argument to cut the cord within my own household, because there were people who visited who had I would say false false beliefs that they had to have cable, right? Until I kind of proved to them that they didn't. But some people still ascribe to that model, and some people still, again, I don't necessarily agree with it, but still, some people still want the 250 channels, of which 229 they never watch, and that's fine, right? And those models still exist. The really crazy models that I, quite frankly, just don't understand, understand even less, are the people who do both, right? But I get it, right? There are some people who have households where there are people who are very mobile, and are moving around all the time and aren't stationary, and so something like a Netflix that goes with them is fine. But then other family household members, are more so stationary and, want like an Xfinity. And then on top of that, right, the bigger thing is then there's package deals and bundle deals all over the place, right, where you do get both. So just like you said, right, I don't feel like, and this is, again, I think a big part of the Twitter dynamic is this behavior, like, in order for Game Pass to rise, PlayStation must fall. And like, it's not that kind of a binary linear, right, arrangement. It's not like, in the cell phone industry, what we talk about is, if we see subscribers, a reduction in subscribers from one quarter to the next from Verizon, and a concurrent rise in subscribers at T-Mobile, we say that we believe that those, right, subscribers left Verizon and went to T-Mobile, but this isn't the same thing. It's not that linear.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Game Launcher, I need to talk to you, by the way, about cutting the cord, man, because I'm looking for deals, man. I'm looking for, because my cable bill's out of control, so. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, about, like, cable's not dead, right? And that's why I feel like, like people. I feel like people are saying, well, if Sony doesn't go this route, they're dead, because this is the future. And I'm like, well, and I use the Nintendo example. Has Nintendo done anything remotely on par from a technology perspective, right? They don't make the most powerful hardware. They don't have, I mean, they don't really have a robust online infrastructure, right? I mean,
no, it's almost like they deliberately make it bad to spite us. Sometimes is what it feels like.
Yeah. Hold on a sec here. Sorry, I'm removing some fanboy nonsense that's going on in the live chat right now. Um, but they kind of just stayed in their own lane, but they were successful doing that. And success for companies, by the way, doesn't mean they have to be number one either. Some companies are a little more conservative, like, hey, you know what, we want this level of growth, and as long as we're doing that, we're okay with it, right? And
not every corporation's charter is to become the market leader or to have the greatest market share.
Exactly. So you look at Nintendo though, but Nintendo's come out, and despite not having all these feature sets that Sony and Microsoft has, and I use my example, I predicted their death 20 years in advancing, and online's the future, and you got to have an Ethernet port. Here they are, 20 years later, and their platform is the number one seller right now, right, with the Nintendo Switch.
And we just got an Ethernet port on the
and we just got an Ethernet port, right? Yeah, exactly. We just got an Ethernet port on that. So, and that's my point. They're able. I think there's so many different lanes and opportunities for companies to be successful in gaming. I don't think people are seeing that. I think and I don't know why, but I mean, just look at Nintendo. Look at the mobile space. The mobile space is huge. I mean, it's so much bigger than console, right? I mean,
well, and if you, and like, there are times that, like, the thing that I want to fling at gamers, particularly on Twitter, again, like, we talk about things, and the people who get most heated and are beating the war drum so much, just like you said, mobile gaming is an incredible beast, and it defies any sense of reason that a console-centric, PC gamer-centric gamer has. Like, I mean, there are things I will say in terms of, like, analysis or whatever, or perspective of the mobile gaming space, and it's kind of like I push the I believe button. Because, right, like, I get it. Yeah, mom and pop standing in line, play a ton of mobile games, and the least gamery kind of person that I can think of plays Candy Crush, forever. But, like, as a like you said, like, as a person who's been gaming for 45 years, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, it's just a weird thing, and a lot of it is because of what we're going to see now too, is people who came into the gaming space via the mobile vector, people who don't know anything different or don't know anything better, or quite frankly don't want to be bothered. Like, one thing that people could look at is all the console gamers who kind of sort of refuse to play on PC, right? And will even, I don't want to say that they manufacture reasons, will even state reasons, right, as if they're rational about why they don't want to play on PC.
Wait, Game Logic. They as somebody who likes PC, they definitely manufacture reasons. Oh, I don't want to deal with the updates and the drivers, and it's so hard. I'm sorry, go ahead, man.
on any given day, right? Sometimes I see their point, and sometimes I'm like, it's not that big a deal, right? Like, it downloads everything automatically.
Well, Game Logic. I mean, I game on PC early 90s, and it's much different today. More streamlined per se. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Do you remember big quick segue? Do you remember in the Windows 98 days? Do you remember the, like, 30-point checklist of, like, everything you needed to do to make your PC run as efficiently as it could?
Yep.
To get, like, the most frames out of games and help it keep up, like keeping all the icons off your desktop.
Yeah.
Right. Doing things like
I remember troubleshooting with my friends. Are your icons off your desktop? Like, what?
shotgunning dual 56K ports on your modem. Like, just all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, now, I mean, I spend like 10 minutes grooming my PC when I first put it together, but, like, other than that, like, that's kind of it. Like, it was a constant thing back in the day. So it's nowhere near, quite frankly, it's nowhere near the load today that it used to be. And consoles are actually much closer to that PC type of experience. Like, when I boot up my PS5 and I gotta get a stinking update for my controller, right? And the way patches and updates are applied, and some of the jankiness you can get, and, like, being conveyed a status that is different than the status that it actually is. But again, you could still look at that space and you could still say, hey, there is a perception barrier, cognitive barrier that makes people feel that PC gaming is more of a hassle. And so they stay firmly rooted in the console space. By the same token, you have people who play mobile games, right, on tablets and on phones and look at consoles and definitely PCs, right, as additional levels of complexity that they don't need. And so again, that will be a vertical slice of the market that really isn't a threat. I mean, it's kind of sort of a threat just in terms of maybe it takes any certain notions of growth away, but at such margins that it's really like in the noise. So somebody pointed out, mobile gaming has been huge, and it hasn't in 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 most contexts, it has not been a direct competitor to the gaming space. Now, where you do see some things butt up against the edges are things like Sony backing out of the mobile gaming space because they were now competing against tablets. I mean, granted, Nintendo had a lock on the mobile gaming space, but another big part of the competition for Sony was people said, do I need to go buy a PlayStation Vita when I'm already buying an iPad, right? Or when it's very close to experiences that I think I can get on my smartphone. Not saying that they were correct, just saying that was a perception.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And the other thing too is, this kind of goes back to my point earlier with Sony, is that at some point they can, as people think about what's the future hold for Sony, at some point and I said this earlier, they can pivot. They can pivot and they can have that streaming, I guess, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's PlayStation Now or whatever they call it in the future. But they can do that because, again, I go back to this one point as I read some of the things in the chat. Some people were saying some really interesting things. I had to remove someone. So, but they can definitely compete. And maybe they don't compete at this exactly the way the way Microsoft's competing in this space. You know what I mean? Like maybe they just kind of like Nintendo, kind of march to the beat of their own drum and are still successful because, look, I think there's obviously a demand for content. There's obviously a demand for gaming. And if they can, maybe the PlayStation becomes this like boutique type device, which maybe isn't a bad thing. As long if you're getting what you want out of the device, you're getting the kind of gaming experiences that you desire. That's not a bad thing either. I don't subscribe to this notion that they all have to be doing the same thing. You know what I mean? Like I don't.
Right.
I just don't believe that.
Right, and I mean, and we see some things right now. So, so I'm going to say some things, and again, they're not meant to be like negative against one brand or another. It's just like the way that I see things. It seems like, and I don't think it's bad, but it seems like there are times when Sony sees people doing things, sees lots of people doing things, and almost deliberately, I think you and I kind of talked like in a very Apple-esque type of way, almost deliberately choose to not do the same thing. Right, and not always for a reason that I feel is rational or that I feel like I can follow, right? Things that sometimes just don't kind of make sense. But that's okay. I mean, they can be that kind of a brand and they can march to their own individual drum. And just like you said, they don't necessarily have to compete. So I don't know that they have to have a streaming service. I think that whatever they do, it will be something different and unique that they feel resonates with the Sony brand. And I don't know what that is. It may be a VR play, right? They may be they've leaned hard into that. They have some attach rate. They have a foothold in that space. Arguably they have the best, biggest, and strongest foothold in the space in high performance VR, right? Because they've outsold most of the other headset types, and they perform better specification wise and fidelity wise than an Oculus Quest 2, which can't do everything that a high performance VR headset can do in untethered mode. and is a little suboptimal, right, in what it's capable of performing, even in tethered mode, right? Because Facebook, not saying that they made a bad choice, made the decision that the way to get traction in VR was that there were tons of people who were interested in VR that weren't wrapped around the axle about having something that performed as well as the Valve Index or the Vive, and so made a headset for them. Um, so Sony will do whatever Sony's going to do, and it's not necessarily going to be the same thing everybody else does. And I mean, they kind of are, even though they're the majority. I'd say that they kind of are a boutique brand. And again, that in many ways, to me, they follow some of those kind of Apple like mantras.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's interesting too is, I guess I would. Well, I'm going to ask you a question because this is. I know you're not a software developer in the gaming industry, but you're kind of in that space, right? So my question is, how do you think this is going to impact developers? And I don't know if that's been discussed enough. And I don't know. Maybe there's some articles out there. I haven't seen them. I've seen many, but how does this affect? Because like I don't know if you watch, if you keep up with Sacred Symbols, Colin Moriarty, his podcast. But he's kind of concerned about consolidation in the gaming industry. It could maybe hamper creativity. And I'm more thinking of when he said that, but more thinking of the little guys, right? The more independent developers. How do you think this impacts them, if any impact at all? This consolidation.
Yeah. So I think, and I'll talk. I'll stick at least at the outset to the Microsoft Activision acquisition. I think for playing in that space and for employees of those organizations, I think that for them, it will be a good get, right, from a career perspective. It will open up the aperture in, rotational roles that they can take on around the corporation, and give them different vectors and different spaces that they can go to. It will give them a bigger collaborative environment. It will give them access to additional talents and tools. One of the things, with Ubisoft, and now we joke, right? But back in the day when I first started reading about this stuff, it's just kind of how their HR engine works. And today we joke about the fact that like when you play an Ubisoft game, like nobody ever talks about like much more than like which is the lead studio at Ubisoft, because pretty much all of them wind up on the credits, right? And the reason for that is because way back in the day, before a lot of other companies started doing this, they established kind of this global. A lot of companies now these days, call them, not job boards, but I don't know. A lot of companies refer to them as benches or other things, but basically it was a mechanism where there was tracking on the various talents of all the developers at all the studios, and whether or not somebody had additional surge capacity, or somebody was winding down on a project. And so it created an ability that if you were at Ubisoft Montreal and you were running into a problem with Jeep physics, and there was a Jeep physics expert at Red Storm in North Carolina, right? You had visibility on the availability of that person, and via their remote tooling, could get that person working on your project. And that is a thing that the rest of the gaming industry, and quite frankly lots of others in the technology industry, eventually caught up to. So in terms of and of course Microsoft is the company that makes Microsoft Teams. You can like Teams or dislike Teams. It's a love-hate relationship with me, right? But this is a company that
I like it when it works.
This is a company that has a big, interest and stake in collaboration tools and development collaboration tools, right? And now owns GitHub, right? And so there's an incredible opportunity for those developers, who are at Activision, who will come over to be hand in hand with leaders in the software engineering, software development, technology space, and will give them access to a lot more tools. We've been talking recently about how there's a hyper focus in gaming discussions in many cases around game implementation at the toppest level. I know that's not a word. At the most user facing strata of the game, right? The thing that sits right in front of your face and the thing that you interact with, right? But what's really important is, the 99 stratifications below that where tooling takes place,
Mm-hmm.
and how, that can make a huge difference. And I talked, recently about how all of these, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of am not a huge fan of Jason Schreier's work, but, everybody who took up the cheerleading from Schreier articles and, jumped on the bandwagon about, you know, Unreal Engine good, Frostbite bad. And I'm like, no, right? Like, engines are engines, but then engines have tools built around them based on their prevalence of use. And Unreal has a ton of tools and a marketplace that have been built up around it because a lot of people use it. Frostbite had only been used by DICE explicitly for building a first-person shooter, and so there weren't tools built around it to enable it to as easily to create the efficiencies that you would need for applying it to an RPG, right, or a driving or a racing game. So that's true. However, what really didn't get intermixed in the conversation was if I'm sitting at a corporate level, right, and I'm greenlighting projects and I'm looking at budgets, and you tell me, I want you to greenlight my AAA game, but I don't have an engine. I'm going to have to go license one, or I'm going to go have to build a new one. And I get a dozen projects coming to me asking me that question, and I go, we have a team over here who's built an engine, and I already spent millions of dollars funding the development of that engine. One of the things that's going to stick in my mind is maximizing my ROI by taking that engine and peanut buttering it across all my development studios and having them use it.
I love how you said that peanut buttering across.
On top of all that,
Yeah.
the other gift that I get out of it, which again, people didn't talk about because they were reading the Schreier article, what they don't get is that, so now, 5 years from now, also, what I have is I also have a army of 3,000 developers who have all learned how to develop in a common tool set. And when I need to transfer them or move them around or get Criterion to help out EA Motive, right? They're now all working in the same common tool set, right? And so again, I can accelerate my development velocity. I can much more easily swing resources in to be a fire jumper, right, and come in and help out in times of crisis. So those are, some of the things that you get. So I think those developers who are in that Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft regime will benefit from efficiencies and synergies like that. I think for the people who are outside, I think you'll get a lot of attractiveness for people who, the development community and the gaming development community in particular is a highly migratory workforce. They kind of go from project to project to project to project. And so this is going to create an opportunity for some people to go to a place and develop there for a very long time and have a very secure career where there can be notions of a promotion path and, a career path. And so you're going to get, some reduction, I think, in that migratory nomadic dynamic, right? Because you're going to have a big block development house that's going to, pop its ass down in the middle of the industry and occupy like 30% of the space, and say, hey, here's a place for you to come work. The other places, it's difficult to tell, what the dynamic's going to be. One thing that you could wind up seeing is as people come into the Microsoft house, we see this a lot in football, right? Like way back in the day, like only the 49ers ran the West Coast offense.
The West Coast, yeah.
And then as all those Bill Walsh assistants, right, migrated out and became
Mike Holmgren.
All of a sudden,
Mike Shanahan.
right.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we had 6 teams running the West Coast offense.
Everyone, I feel like everyone runs a West Coast offense now. By the way,
I'm reminded this week of the Jim Kelly no huddle offense. We have we have a lot of youngins that think that was a Peyton Manning thing, and I'm like, nope. Jim Kelly used to run that way back in the day.
Yep. That's funny. Yeah. So you don't think there's any? So I guess you don't think there's for the smaller people. If there, I guess my point is, if there's less publishers to pitch ideas to, because they've been gobbled up by the Microsofts, the Amazons, whatever the case is. Is that troubling then? For the smaller people who maybe have less people to pitch their ideas to. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I probably should be going somewhere with this question, but does that kind of make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just don't think we're there yet. I mean, and so to me, that's kind of like, the Firefly world or like the Blade Runner dystopian world. That's the point where there's like 6 mega corporations on the planet and that's it. I think we're still a ways off from that. And the comparison that I would make, I guess, is despite the fact that we live in a world now where there's a big 5 in the technology industry, right? We have Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google. Who's the 5th one that I'm?
Apple.
And Apple. Right. And
it's funny you mention that because I'm actually in the industry where it's the big 4.
Right.
So, but anyway, go ahead, Ben. Yeah.
And and more than one of these companies now are multi-trillion-dollar companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that we have that, we haven't necessarily seen stagnation across the entire tech industry. From time to time, they happen in very specific markets, like smartphones.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right? Smartphones aren't really moving a lot now, although we have foldables, right? And so things are going on. But people then slip and slide into these market adjacencies, and right now probably VR, AR will become a thing. Google has all the different services and natural language processing and AI, ML, and all these things are going to come along. So I don't know that we've seen a point where, because there's big consolidations or really big companies or really giants of the industry, that all innovation gets squashed. And actually,
so you don't think that's going to hurt innovation, creativity?
I think it's going to make it different. I think we're definitely going to experience a time where people are going to claim. I don't want to say maybe like call it right, but I think people are going to claim that innovation is being stifled. But it's just like, look, it's just like the conversation I was in the other day where somebody said, Microsoft does this one size fits all, and now you have to subscribe to get Microsoft Office. And I'm like, no, you can still buy Microsoft Office. In fact, it's the same problem it's always been. You can buy it in like 19 different SKUs, right? It's just that everybody knows about the subscription model, and so everybody dilutes to this point where they think that's the only way to buy it, and they don't know or become aware of these other methodologies. And so I think, the vast part of the public is going to come to believe that innovation is being stifled, but that's because they're not going to be reading and consuming all these other things where other things are going on.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, we got that super chat from Borbor Country. Super chat says Americans forget Xbox is disliked internationally. Thank you for that super chat, Borbor. Love the name, by the way. Yeah, it's just it's interesting. Like because I've heard people, like I said, Colin Moriarty was talking about that could stifle creativity, this consolidation of the industry. And that's just something like I'm not saying 100% that's going to happen, but I wonder if that could be an outcome of this. Who, I guess obviously time will tell, right? I just wonder if this kind of acquisition was would maybe suck the oxygen out of the room for these small developers. I mean, I don't know. I
think one of the so slightly crazy predictions, right, is I do wonder, and I think so. Let me back all the way out, right, and propose really what all of this is about, right? When we talk about even getting Game Pass into more people's hands via other delivery mechanisms, right, than consoles and PCs. A lot of this is about those new markets not being willing to pay, right, certain amounts of money, but also about the gaming industry today right, waging this kind of, I don't know, I guess I wonder if this is some type of, proto-Luddite or neo, proletariat uprising against any notion of any additional monetization within the gaming industry, any increase in gaming prices, any, clear. I mean, what is going on in the industry is there are a lot of gymnastics going on right now to figure out, in my opinion, how to keep up with the rising costs of production and gaming. And kind of like we
Oh,
talked
you
about.
you mean that gamers don't want to pay more money for games?
So kind of like we talked about last week, right? The gaming industry pricing model has been frozen in time since 2005. And regardless of what
But
conspiracy theories you want to believe
well,
and
game
tinfoil.
logic. But what about these? These developers, record revenues.
Right, right. Which I would contend is about volume, not about margins, because the margins have stayed either the same or they've gotten smaller, right? And so you have to, at a minimum, right, accept as a rule inflation, um, and the rising costs of human labor, right, of human capital, right, because developers aren't making less money today than they were in 2005. I will directly tell you, developers are not making less money, right? I haven't gone from job to job to take pay cuts, right? Um, so,
It's a great point, by
right,
the way. It's true. Yes,
and as things get more complex, the demands on high level talent
that's a great
increase.
point.
You're able to command a great Scott, man. Like I deliberately don't release job recs unless I'm absolutely desperate, labeling them as cloud, because that immediately brings in, right, a salary premium on the ask, right? And that's true, right, in technology industries across the board. Whenever, right, you get to these new innovations that are coming out, right? And so I'm sure in the gaming industry, anybody who is oriented around, DevOps and continuous deployment, in an industry that needs to deliver patches to server side oriented games, without actually with taking the system down with minimal amounts of time of disruption in people's playtime, right, is going to command like a salary premium. So what we talked about this Game Pass move is to get access to the 2 billion people who we think are easier to get traction with by hitting them with mobile games, right? So I think what we could see. So the point is that all of these gymnastics that we've seen, right? NFTs, this acquisition, microtransactions. Again, people forget like the recent history, right? The
Hmm.
fact that we all, led a revolution against monthly subscription rates and $15 map packs for Call of Duty, and the industry said, "Fine, we will give you season passes and battle passes so that we don't sell you map packs that bifurcate the community and make people feel left out, and we won't make you pay monthly subscriptions for MMOs. We'll let you buy, the Destiny 2 style like expansion pack, and you can play for 3 or 4 months until we release the next thing, right?" So we've gyrated all these different monetization models, right? And I get sometimes not frustrated, but I feel like sometimes people act like they just made this crap up for no reason, right? I'm like, no, you guys said you didn't want to pay the way the model was the last time, and so they came up with a new one, and now you're saying you don't want to pay for this one. So my feeling is we're going to start hitting cycles where AAA games, especially, there's going to kind of be a no more point, right? And they're going to say, look, because one thing we don't have in the gaming industry is we don't have tiered levels of this luxury product, right? In other markets, um,
You know what? I'm sorry, Game Logic. That's a great point. You know what's funny? I never thought of it like that. You just said that. I'm like light bulb. I'm like we had TVs, cars. We just talked about phones a little while ago, right? We have several tiers, not gaming per se, but I'm sorry. Go
right,
ahead, man.
right. We have luxury, mid, and budget, right? And other than kind of what we talked about last week, kind of this mystical hard line between like indies and I would say everything else, right? We don't really have that stratification. I think what we could potentially wind up seeing is, I I personally would say on the pricing side, because again I get involved very much with pricing software. I, Part of me, as I look at this, I would go like I would just be frustrated, and I would just say, look, a AAA game costs $120, right? If you don't want to pay $120, then don't buy it, right? Go buy and pay, right? Pay and play a AA game or an indie, right? My kids cannot eat on your numbers of hours of gameplay, right? So so I feel like, look, you don't want to do microtransactions. You don't want to do, and again, there's some reasons to push back against NFTs. I get that, right? But you don't want to do microtransactions. I'm just throwing them in the mix. You don't want to do microtransactions. You don't want to do NFTs. You don't want to do expansion packs. You don't want to buy map packs. You don't want to buy the season pass. You don't want to buy the battle pass, right? Look, I'm done, right? AAA games are $120. AA games are $70. Indies are $50 and below, right? Take your pick. And so what I think could happen in pricing models is we could see, and where I think there is some bad, right, that happens from consolidation, is because as you consolidate, those power blocks are going to become better and able to set pricing, right? Not meaning, collude, right, to set prices, but are going to be much more strengthened with negotiating power in the marketplace, and will be able to increase prices on at least AAA games, right? And I think what you will see if they drift towards that is you will see companies that will go, look, we can't do AAA and stand alone anymore, right? So you might see a reduction in the amount of variety of teams that are doing AAA games, because those studios are going to have to consolidate around the console manufacturers and the remaining third-party publishers, right? Somebody like GSC Game World, who's doing
wait,
Stalker 2.
so Game
Yeah,
Launcher, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, man. So
yeah.
so you're saying that the consolidation would lead to maybe this pricing structure where we're going to pay more for AAA games? I just want to make sure I understood that correctly.
I think so. I mean, if we continue the rallying cry of we're not going to pay any more and we're not going to pay any different, right?
Okay. So then
Because
how would subscription services like Game Pass kind of play into this, where you're not spending $120 now? Now you're spending that $120 in a subscription service. Like, how do the economics of that work out? Like, is that viable? Like, that's also been a question about Game Pass, and I think we talked about like Sean Layden's comments on that too.
right. So let me split those those two questions up. So I would say it's feasible that we could go towards a model where you that's your binary choice. You either pay a higher price per AAA game, or you subscribe, right? I mean, because at a certain point, I have to think Microsoft and Activision, right? So Activision's model is season pass, battle pass, and microtransactions. Microsoft's model is subscriptions. I don't know that it would make sense for them to combine forces and offer 3 or 4 different monetization models if the whole point is to drive people towards Game Pass. Maybe they'll do that. Maybe they'll agree in that diversification. But maybe there's an argument that would say, if I want to make Game Pass the most powerful thing it can be, I'm going to cordon all of my customers right in that direction. And I'm going to give them a limited amount of choices, right? So that they can't, right, fan out so wide, right, and procure my game via so many different means. All of that is to say, again, that I think what you could see is you could see the rising costs of production get to a point where you can't be, the example I was throwing out was you can't be a GSC Game World, right, who's doing Stalker 2, which looks like a AAA game. And I would contend one of the reasons we're seeing the delays in that game is because that studio is struggling with just making payroll, right? I don't know that you're going to continue to see studios that can pull that kind of a thing off, or that there is an appetite for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's always going to be some developers who are willing to mortgage their homes, right, to build a AAA game, but are developers going to continue to mortgage their homes to build a AAA game for people who are pushing back all the time about, right, paying any more or paying any different kind of way? So if all of that kind of comes to be something that people have less and less of an appetite for, you could see a space where again, the market kind of stratifies right into its pricing models, and where AAA becomes something that really only the big boys on the pond, right, can play in.
Which wouldn't be any different, like you said, to any other items other consumer goods, right?
I mean,
that are.
it's admittedly tough for me to think of examples just off the cuff, like in that $50 to $100 range. But certainly like just up above that, right? We have premium laptops, we have mid-grade laptops, and we have low-end laptops, and we have
I mean,
Apple, which kind of admittedly kind of
I mean,
arguably made
look at the movies. You look at IMAX. IMAX, the pricing to go
right.
see a movie in IMAX is different than going to just the regular showing.
Movie is different than a 2D movie. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, those models exist. I've always kind of argued, and again, I know people are gonna be like, "Oh, you're advocating for consumers to pay more money." Someone's going to say that to me in the comments later on, after we go off air. But no, what I'm saying is, it's interesting. It's a great point, because in the gaming landscape, I feel like consumers forget that gaming is a consumer product. It's not immune to the types of I guess economics that are in other consumer goods, right? For the things you just mentioned, like like the tiers, right? Like, or the choices, like consumer
Right.
I don't know if it's you or someone else that. Maybe it was you, and I think someone else said, consumers in gaming seem to forget that they're adults and they can make choices. Like if they don't want to buy, it's like,
That's common drum in mine.
yeah, it's like, but it's so true. It's like, and it's like, oh, they're forcing me. No, they're not forcing you. You don't have to do it.
Right. Like, I get it. I understand it's all well intended, but I'm like, people complain about microtransactions, or people complain about the price of microtransactions, like in Halo and Call. And I'm like, look, you don't have to buy that stuff.
Yeah, people. Oh, the people complain. Oh, PlayStation, the $10 tax to get exclusives, or to get, or not to get exclusives, to get these feature sets. I'm like, you realize that you probably participate in that behavior with other consumer products. For example, I bought a LG OLED C1. It's a $2,000 TV. Why did I buy that? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's like, I feel like people in the gaming should forget that the thing they're complaining about, they probably do with other consumer products or services. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate to do this. So we're talking in the chat as how like there's no way they're filling up Game Pass with big budget games at $15 a month. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's already big budget games in Game Pass at $15 a month. And then on top of that, then they added EA, which has big budget AAA games right in Game Pass. And so and what we talked about, I mean, you and I talked about is like, is Xbox going to increase price on Game Pass? And like, I don't know, but I think no, because that doesn't make any sense if I'm trying to access the 2 billion gamers on the planet who don't want to pay.
Well, I think at least right now that's not the case. Right. Yeah.
I think at least I can feel confident that we're not going to see the Netflix model, right, where we creep the cost, right, by $1, and 67 cents like every other month.
Netflix just went up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No, I don't think they're going to increase it. I think they're going to want to get their hooks into the consumer first, so that it makes it difficult for them to say, you know what, the price increased, I'm not going to do this anymore. I think, yeah.
And the other half of the question you mentioned is, is Xbox profitability. Again, I go back to I don't feel, based on the way he articulated it, right, which is that months ago Phil Spencer said that it's sustainable. I haven't gotten a strong signal that tells me that Game Pass has to be profitable today, right? That it needs to be sustainable, which means there's an acceptable amount of loss. And again, Amazon is the king of that kind of vehicle, right? Also keep in mind, right, that Amazon, and that I talk about that being Amazon's approach on books, right? But the whack-a-mole that Amazon has also pulled off with Amazon Web Services, which is their enterprise play, right, was that costs were incredibly low and people made savings on the front end, and then that model flipped, right? And there were suddenly big balloon price increases on cloud services after the fact, right? After people were locked in.
Yeah.
So there are multiple different approaches, right? But I mean, it's firmly been established in the technology industry that, particularly today and particularly in services, that you can go with a loss leader kind of model and get big traction and big subscribers, and then flip the model once you have a point where you are going to be overall profitable.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm gonna grab the super chat real quick. $5 super chat from Barbara Country. Hypocrisy about anti-consumer. Microsoft has taken 2 publishers. Sony didn't do that, but IGM, GameSpot, even BRAP for the past 2 years.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what.
I think what he's saying is Microsoft took Bethesda and now
Bethesda,
Activision. But again, I go back to, at least I think our discussion right now is not about any sense of ethics. And I'm sorry, but if you live in a capitalist economy, right? I mean, yes, we have ethical business practices, and there are the notions of morality, but it's not unethical for Microsoft to have bought Bethesda and Activision. It's just business, and it's business that maps to Satya Nadella's strategy, theoretically, right, and where he wants to skate the company in terms of services instead of being the company that sold, Windows at $140 a pop in boxes wrapped in plastic at Office Depot, right? It's a different world.
That brings back memories.
Right. And again, that's a company that has to do things different than Sony, because Microsoft is a $3 trillion company and Sony is a $150+ billion company, and they're an electronics company, and Microsoft is a software and service. People fighting 2 different battles. And yes, they have 2 divisions that are in the same market, but that means in order to map the strategies of that division to what the corporate CEOs want and need, that's different. Sony needs to sell televisions and laptops and cell phones. They don't do a great job in selling cell phones. Microsoft doesn't need to do that. Microsoft has to do other things. Microsoft needs to sell enterprise subscriptions to Microsoft Azure and cloud services and Office 365, right, and other things, and they need to make enterprise plays. They need to sell, cloud native development environments to Sega. They need to sell enterprise subscriptions to cloud services to Sony so that they can put their games on that platform and have them hosted there. They're just different concerns and different dynamics that those 2 companies wind up having to follow. Those 2 divisions wind up having to follow because their corporations are pointed in different directions.
Yeah, that's actually a great point about how their corporations are pointing in different directions. You're right. It's it's clear that the Game Pass and everything going xCloud, it's all tied to Azure, which is what Satya's focus is, right? Growing that business, that Azure business, that software as a services type thing. And so that's a great point. I don't think people realize that enough or talk about it. But I do want to pivot here real quick, Game Lodge. This kind of be this will be the last topic of the evening. But a lot of speculation over what's going to happen with Call of Duty. Is it going to be exclusive to Xbox? I've read some things that maybe from a regulatory perspective, it's maybe not in Microsoft's best interest to keep COD exclusive because there's some financial damage to Sony if they do that, some significant financial damage. I don't know what that is. This is, again, what a couple analysts that I've read have said. DFC Intelligence had a pretty good article about this where they were saying that it could potentially damage the COD IP. Microsoft could still benefit tremendously even by keeping it multi-platform because the big play here is Game Pass at the end of the day. Real quick, Bulbar Country, the $2 super chat. The $2 super chat, thank you, Bulbar, says, you did not answer the hypocrisy in Xbox coverage. I don't know, man. I don't know what you're referring to in terms of Xbox coverage or hypocrisy in that coverage. I don't know, man. You'd have to give me a little more, some specifics.
I don't know if he's saying that he wants us to say Xbox bad for buying publishers Sony good for only buying exclusives.
I don't know. Yeah,
Well,
but we appreciate the super chat, Bobor. Thank you. So that's been kind of the there's a lot of discussion around the exclusivity of Call of Duty moving forward, and Phil Spencer came out and tweeted, had good calls this week with leaders at Sony. I confirmed our intent to honor all existing agreements upon acquisition of Activision Blizzard and our desire to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation. Sony is an important part of our industry, and we value our relationship. All right. My thoughts real quick. I'm on the fence here. 50-50. This thing could go either way, in my opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if they kept it multi-plat. Also wouldn't surprise me if they pulled it. How do you... What do you think, Game Logic? Like, how are you reading this statement by him?
So I'll go ahead and reveal a little bit of the backdoor channeling that we've been doing. So, and I could be wrong on this, but my understanding, what I thought was the case, was that those deals for Call of Duty were, I mean, and they're probably structured differently each time, but were probably oriented around like 5-year deals, right? Maybe there was one in there that was 3-year deals. And if we remember, we saw in console generation 6, right, that Call of Duty always showed up on Microsoft stage, right? And then in 8 we started that flipping, and then we saw them showing up on the PlayStation stage, and we saw exclusive content going to PlayStation, and in some cases some of that content being exclusive to PlayStation, for being timed exclusive to PlayStation for a year, at which point I was like, so I don't care that I'm getting it on Xbox like a year later. Like, I'm moving on to the next Call of Duty if that's okay. Whatever. So, there's one, so the statement could be taken at face value, which is that he intends to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation the entire time, into the future. There's about 2 different ways that could be some corporate speak, right, that needs to be pulled apart. One of which is that if I remember correctly, they re-upped the deal last year for Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. And so this would be the 2nd year of that deal. And so that deal may have another 3 years to run. And what Phil might be saying is, hey, we're going to honor currently existing deals, right? And then behind his hand be saying, the currently existing deal that only goes out for another 3 years. Right? And then after that, I'm going to do whatever the hell it is that I want to do. Which could mean that it could go exclusive. What I'll settle on, at least from my perspective for now, is I think what's going to happen is Call of Duty is going to go into Game Pass in some format. Doesn't mean you're going to get the whole game. But look at Halo Infinite, right? You could easily do Call of Duty, the multiplayer component, on Game Pass, right? And then say, hey, you can go into Game Pass and you can play the multiplayer component for up until Season 1 starts, right? Because at least Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War came out, and you got the game, you played for like 4 weeks or something like that, and then Season 1 dropped, and then you picked up from there. So you could easily do that. You could easily give them Season 1, and then have them re-up on Season Passes and Battle Passes after that. And if that iteration did have a single player campaign, right, you could make that a separate thing. Or vice versa. You could tell people, hey, you can play the single player campaign, right, on Game Pass, but for multiplayer, and multiplayer you get, up to Season 1, then you gotta pay, whatever, lots of different models. Yeah. But I think, at the end of the day, I believe that what they're going to do is they're going to, when it comes to PlayStation, they're going to pinion into that corner where they say, hey, yeah, you can play on PlayStation. You just need to pay $70, right, for it. Or you can play it on Xbox, right, and subscribe to Game Pass and give them that choice. The most Machiavellian way that there are whispers behind what he said is, and I think this is a little far-fetched, is he could say, hey, Game Pass is available on any platform that wants to incorporate it and make it compatible for writing on their service backbone. That includes Sony. It is now up to Sony if they want to incorporate it. And if they don't, then you don't get Call of Duty. And if you do, we're more than happy to accommodate you. And I just throw that out as a notion because that is essentially what Microsoft has done about Office and several of its other products, where they've said, we don't care if you use those things on a Windows box. We don't care if you use it on a Windows phone, and eventually Windows Phone went away. If you want to use our products on Android, you're more than welcome to. If you want to use them on your Apple device, you're more than welcome to. We will even accommodate Linux and back and forth and Mac OS, right? We just want you to be Microsoft customers and use our tools because we think our tools are good, and you can use them wherever you want to. You want to use them on your tablet, on your phone, whatever. And so enacting the Game Pass model in that way, right, even to where they've on iOS enabled it, via the browser, that could be the approach path that they choose with Sony. Obviously, that would cause a huge outcry, but it kind of might be a thing that Satya says, get over it.
Wow, interesting. That's a great point. That's a great point. I mean, definitely, definitely different things going to happen for sure. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they could definitely, like Satya could be like, yeah, you don't want to play ball, too bad, right? And B Money brings up in the live chat. He said, Sony may have signed deals for COD or Overwatch for Sony's esports league. So there could be something there. But I do think there is a value proposition still, even if COD, I think you said it too, like, it's, you pay $70 there, or you can, get it, $15 here, whatever the case is. Right. The interesting thing is we're not going to know this till 2023, what's going to happen. At least. Right.
I want to talk about one thing in the chat that's been about something I've been thinking. So Plus Ultra says, I kind of hope Xbox buys all trash games like COD and takes them off PlayStation to push the PlayStation quality even further. Could result in a SOCOM game that murders COD. I'll say I would definitely be up for another SOCOM game. I would also say I don't think it's a linear relationship. Like, because Microsoft does X, then you will get more Y. I'm absolutely certain it does not work like that. Because again, I'll go back to, nine women cannot make a baby in 1 month. And quality is a thing
that's great, by the way. Nine women cannot make a baby in 1 month. That's great.
Not my analogy. It was an analogy from one of the great giants of software engineering as a science, Fred Brooks, in his book The Mythical Man Month. But and then I would say quality is a thing that moves exponentially, not linearly. So that's,
wait, Gilbert, real quick. I'm sorry. So you do think that Phil would say, you know what? If you want COD, you're gonna have to get Game Pass on your platform, or else we're done.
I don't know that Phil would, but I could definitely see Satya saying that, right? Because and I only say that because that is what Microsoft has said about all of its other products.
Yeah. Right? No, and I know you gave examples of that, but I was just thinking as we were talking. I'm sorry, my mind's all over the place right because I didn't get much sleep last night. So, but I was thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, that's, I mean, and Jeff Grubb actually brought that up on a podcast I did with him on Thursday. He brought up that very point that that Phil's words of "it's our desire" could be like, hey, you know what? We wanted it. They didn't want it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm sorry. Go ahead, man. I interrupted. But yeah.
Sorry. I'm going back to what Plus Ultra was saying. While there are pieces of me that agree with you, one of the things that stuck out in my mind most recently is the news just recently came out that Call of Duty Vanguard was, make sure, see where this article got posted in my own Discord. That December 2021 NPD Call of Duty Vanguard was the best-selling game in that month. And then I also go back to where I talk about Battlefield 2042, right? I mean, these are games that I feel like it's been empirically established that they are not great games, but Battlefield 2042 was one of the most played games on Steam. And now we've got Call of Duty Vanguard, which has not reviewed well, but is still one of the best-selling games. So my only thing is just, I think we've commented about it on this show, right, is there's a thing that we think and that even a lot of us will ascribe to, who are kind of in the social media space and the game discussion space, even here on YouTube, that does not always true up and does not always equate to what the actual consumer market is doing. And so I would like to say, Call of Duty, not a big deal. Everybody who plays it, it's a trash game. It's not sophisticated. It's just like lowbrow. People play that, and I'm like, Call of Duty is a beast. And in this acquisition, Call of Duty Mobile is, I mean, I almost can't put words around it, right? To the dollars that thing moves, and it's an old game at this point, right? And so I think one of the things I think that's dangerous, right, in analysis and projections, is that there are just so many pieces of this
Yeah,
dynamic, right,
sure.
and the news cycle and the financial reality that people commenting in this space sometimes like to ignore because there are things that we like to ascribe to, right? Look, Sony makes some great games. Um, I don't know that they make games that appeal to a wide gamut of gamers from a genre perspective, right? They've nailed the third person action adventure, um, near linear wide path kind of design model. Um, Whether or not they can leverage that foothold to, in all vectors, for a genre perspective for all gamers, is a thing that that we'll have to see, and potentially, if they can't, right, leaves room for Microsoft to leverage this acquisition,
Hmm.
right,
That's a good point.
into growth.
And I think that to to your point about them maybe specializing in one type of game style, right, or genre or whatever. This may push them to look. They're working on they're working on like two exclusive FPS games right now, so they're probably addressing that anyway. But maybe this pushes them to do other things too, because of this acquisition, right? And this is where that competition is great, right? Pushes Sony, pushes Microsoft. Maybe this pushes Sony to do what you just said they probably need to do, right? So it's and I'm curious to see, and maybe and the other thing too is we don't know kind of what we also don't know what Sony, because I think Sony plays a lot of things close to the chest, so we don't know kind of what they have in in development now. But I think I know B Money's in the chat, and if you remember this Game Logic, there was a lot of there were some people I think that didn't like Jim Ryan or something, and people were like, "Oh, Sean Layden's gone, and who's this Jim Ryan guy?" And I remember B Money saying to us on BRAP, Jim Ryan is he's looking to kind of grow this thing, build this thing out, and maybe try to do things a little bit differently than what the previous regime has done. I don't know what that means, but maybe they are doing some of these things behind the scenes. And if they're not, maybe this acquisition again forces them to do that. Someone mentioned SOCOM in the live chat. Like, I think that's kind of been one of the things that that Sony doesn't. That Sony clearly doesn't. They don't have like that exclusive third person or first person FPS anymore, right? I mean, when's the last time I mean, I know they've had the Last of Us and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean,
Multiplayer and yeah.
I think some of the people in the chat are missing the point because they're talking about the numbers of units sold. So I guess my alternative perspective I offer is, um, those are units of sales against a user base of 140 million. So they kind of should arguably be selling that much, right? My point is that if you look at all of gamerdom, right, which is more than the 140 million people, right, and you talk about genre, because we have sales data that indicates that gamers largely play genre first and franchise second. Um, what I'm saying is that the bulk of genres offered by the Sony platform at the AAA level are oriented around one pretty specific design model. And that design model doesn't branch out far beyond those top sellers, is what I'm saying. And I'm saying that in terms of product differentiation, right, that if you don't move to capture spaces where you are not, then that leaves the opportunity for other developers, publishers, Microsoft to gain growth in those areas, is my point, guys.
It's a great. No,
Now,
I mean, I
again,
go ahead.
you can go back to what we talked about
Mhm.
vision and strategy and charter, and Sony's vision could very well be that's good enough for them. That's fine. That doesn't change the market reality that they're leaving space where other people can skate to.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, that's and to that point, maybe they are addressing some of these things now too. I mean, I know they have two FP, and I bring up the FPS thing because that's something that comes up a lot. They don't have that, that first person, like they don't have like a Halo type, right? They haven't had that in quite some time from a multiplayer, like maybe since SOCOM. I don't know. Well, I mean, like I said, they had what is it? The Last of Us multiplayer, Uncharted multiplayer, but they don't have any like multiplayer exclusive content right now. And B Money brings up a great point too. They do have 30 games in development right now, and he said all of them are not third-person action adventure games. That's a great point, and so maybe they are pivoting.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and that is a good point. I
yeah.
guess the
But
alternate
I see
perspective,
what you're saying though. Yeah,
yeah, and the alternate perspective I would offer is that's great. That's future. That's not today. And what I don't know as a Sony PlayStation player, I don't know when those games are coming, what exactly even all those 30 games are, right? Because some people know them who are kind of inside the information loop, but the common consumer isn't. Um, it doesn't that doesn't necessarily inspire me to confidence, and then I don't know how all those games are going to land and hit. Right? What I know today is that um, there is a band of development that Sony has, from my understanding, doubled down on, right? Which is persisting in doing what they do well, which is kind of your Uncharted's, your Lasts of Us, and other games kind of in that ilk by focusing those top tier development studios, right? Insomniac, Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, on doing those things. Um, what they do beyond that and else that and adjacent to that and how they widen that aperture, I just have yet to see evidence of that myself. And when it gets here, that'll be great, right? That'll give other options for people to use their PlayStation. And obviously, clearly, there's a bunch of people who are happy with that. I'm also not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that that is right, and that's a quantifiable is, and so that leaves space for the things that are is not.
B, what do you say? I know some of them. Oh my goodness. At Game Logic, I swear, it's funny when B says stuff. B, we got to talk on DM, man. You got to tell me what you know. And he's going to say, I don't know anything. Anyhow.
Right. And to a certain extent, like, I don't want to know. Like, I don't want to make. I don't know. How do I want to say? Because I'm not trying to say this. Like the people who know stuff will have a perspective that the people who don't know stuff don't have, right? But the people who don't know stuff are the people who are, right, the vast majority of the market and are making up these market forces and making decisions, right? We talk about this acquisition, right, and where it has potential to swing. Look, I by no means think that like Microsoft acquiring Activision means Microsoft has won the gaming generation. But what I will say is, the is right is that over the next 2 years we will see more and more gamers entering the market space, and more of those gamers are going to make decisions about where they're going to go. Those entry level gamers are not the gamers who can buy multiple platforms, right? They typically come in being able to afford one. And today, depending on what decision they make, I'm not making their decision for them, right? The choice that they're faced with is they don't know what's going to happen with Call of Duty, right? long term, right? And let's say a console life cycle now is 6 or 7 years, right? I just threw a stinking 2 terabyte SSD in the expansion slot in my PlayStation 5 because I know this damn thing is going to be here, right, until 2028, right? So, you know, those people have to make those choices,
Yeah.
and what people are exposed to now is they're exposed to a certain degree of uncertainty, right, where they're going to have to make a guess and decide, which side of the fence they're going to land on.
Yeah. That's a good point. I want to get super chat by $2 super chat from Bober Country. Xbox and COD caters to violence in U.S. PS not as much. What? Okay. Yeah. Anyhow, we are at the 11 o'clock hour now. So I do want to go ahead and wrap up the show. First, I want to thank everyone in the live chat for coming out and hanging out with us tonight. Really appreciate everyone in the live chat. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe, hit the bell notification, hit the like button if you haven't done so already. And also, want to say just big thank you to Game Logic, man. Always a pleasure talking shop with you. I really appreciate it. Again, I know it was kind of at the 11th hour, but I do appreciate you carving some time out to hang out with us and talk video games, man.
That's always a good time being on, and getting an opportunity to talk about games in a rational space is a
absolutely. That's why, and that's why I enjoy having you on. Because that tends to be the conversation, and it's a nice break, man, from what I see on Twitter. So,
yeah. And my last piece out, right, is I just want to mention, right, whatever I said, right, these things are never about any feelings or desire by me for Xbox to win or Sony to win or prediction that one of them is going to win out over the other, right? It's largely just to say that here are notional facts of the case, right, that you have to ascribe to if you understand and buy into certain laws of economics, right, and technical laws around software engineering and development. And then given your awareness, right, of those facts, right, then you can go off and make decisions on your own.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point. But no, again, Game Logic, seriously, man, thank you again. Always a pleasure. We'll have to have you back on again, man. And look, everyone, again, thank you in the live chat. Please enjoy the rest of the weekend. Be safe out there. More importantly, just enjoy playing video games.
Hey, BRAP, can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead, man. Yeah, absolutely.
But somebody brought this up in chat, and this is, given the amount of time I spend going over gaming history, I think this is great. So, Odedro01 mentioned Sony have over 30 games in development, but they need to increase the amount to 50 in the next 5 years. So we talked a lot about tonight about whether or not this acquisition is a threat, right, in the dynamics and forces that it could incite. What I will say is, for people who didn't live through it, right, but please go. I would suggest casually go read about it, just so you become right. The video game market crash of the early 80s.
Oh, right? Yes. Thank you, Atari, for that, by the way, E.T.
Right. One of the reasons that happened is because the industry flooded the market with low-quality games that were not highly differentiated and didn't create a lot of tractionable appeal to gamers. And so that type of thing, Odedro01, right, is a thing that could become a threat, right, to the industry, which is that, like, if you have Game Pass and you start shoving a lot of things in Game Pass, and companies who aren't occupying that 30% of the market, right, decide that, hey, the way to combat that is to, and I agree that Sony does have to do something with its own productivity. It is mentioned as much, right, that the consistency of its development output is something that they want. For anybody in the software engineering space, that's something that we always want, right? We always want look,
Yeah.
project leads and software engineers who, if they say that code's going to take 6 months, then it takes 6 months, and it doesn't take 60, right? So, but right, if the way that the industry approaches combating that is to increase its volume at the expense of arguably already hazarded quality, and we start getting a bunch of churn, that will become bad. That will become a negative force on the industry, which is could cause a huge market and industry correction that I don't think any of us want as gamers.
That's a great point because a lot of people don't remember that. It's funny you mentioned it. As soon as you said Atari, I knew exactly where you're going with it because that's what happened. It was it was quantity over quality.
Yep.
And that ultimately killed. And the joke is E.T. I mean, like, that was the joke is that E.T. killed the industry. That may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but E.T. was bad.
Yeah,
There was a lot of bad games. It was just, and you're right, it was just the sake of having games for the sake of having them.
Right.
And
for anybody who didn't live through it, just so you understand, for a period of 2 years, right, maybe closer to 3, you would go to an electronics store and there would be no video games. Right?
Nothing. I remember that, yeah.
No consoles.
I don't
no
think I saw
video
consoles
games.
until NES came again.
Yeah, I think Coleco. I can't remember the timeline exactly perfect. I think ColecoVision was somewhere in there.
In between, kind of.
Yeah.
ColecoVision was, yeah.
Yeah, but like it was a wasteland, right? There were no video game magazines. Like it was, yeah, it was a thing.
Yeah, no, it was pretty bad. So we don't. So sometimes, it's that old saying. Sometimes less is more. So.
Yep.
But that's a great point, Game Logic. But yeah, no, thank you everyone for hanging out with us. Game Logic, always a pleasure, man. We'll definitely have to get you back on, talk some more video games. And everyone, again, have